So paragraph 7 and 8 was about wind as a source of energy. And one of the important things that we understand about wind as a potential resource for energy is how consistently it occurs. And there's some places in the earth where the wind blows more consistently than at other times. But one of the important ideas that we underlined in those two paragraphs was how wind occurs. What is wind and where does wind come from? And I just want to introduce you to the first few ideas about where wind comes from and how wind forms. I think we all know what it is. It's air molecules, nitrogen, oxygen, whatever is in the atmosphere, the matter in the atmosphere that makes up the atmosphere. It's moving, and it moves because of the heating and cooling of the earth. So just quickly check out this little diagram that I've prepared for you. So the sun, here's a field somewhere in Shenandoah County, and it's plowed and it's pretty much ready for crops. Either a winter crop since we're in the fall, or it might be in the spring and a summer crop or an early spring crop getting ready to be planted, but it's plowed and ready to go. And you have a stand of trees over here to the left side, and it's a cool day. And if you go up in the atmosphere, it gets even colder. So the sun is beating down on this 40-acre field. And over the course of the day, starting in the morning, the sun's rays are beating down on the surface of the planet, and what begins to occur is a process that we call absorption. And that is simply solar radiation striking the surface of the Earth, and because solar radiation has thermal energy in it, heat, that thermal energy begins to be absorbed into the surface of the Earth. So it begins to be absorbed. Well, once the ground starts to heat up and gets warm, the next thing we see that happens is the surface, which is warming now, and actually down into the earth has warmed, the surface begins to radiate or to release solar radiation, solar energy, thermal energy that's been absorbed into the surface of the earth and is being stored there. Well, that energy begins to be released. And as that energy begins to be released up into the air above the ground, little by little, the air above the ground also begins to warm. And it begins to get warmer and begins to get warmer, and more solar radiation strikes the ground, and more thermal energy is absorbed into the ground and stored, and then more radiant energy or thermal energy is released into the atmosphere, into the air above the ground, and eventually you'll get a bubble of air that becomes so warm that it kind of comes together and begins to will begin to move up into the atmosphere. It will begin to move. And when that warm air releases from the ground and begins to move, and it's because warm air rises, well, guess what happens? Cool air comes in underneath and begins to replace the warm air that was up above, that is moving up above, and you even have cool air from the stand of trees that will move out and take the place of the warm air that's rising. And so as all this is occurring, what we actually have happening is we have wind forming. So as this cool air comes in to replace the warm air that is rising, the cool air comes in to take its place. And as simple as it might seem, this is how wind is formed. Now we call this process the process of convection, where warm air heats and rises above the ground, and cool air comes in to take its place. And so here's kind of another little diagram that has a lot going on in it, and you might even pause the video at this point and just kind of look at everything that's going on here. I won't spend a lot of time talking about it right now. We'll come back to it a little bit later when we talk about the role of the sun in providing heat to the earth. But convection is the air above the ground gets warmed, it rises. Well, cool air sinks when warm air is rising. Cool air sinks to take the place of warm air. In fact, cool air moves down to the ground in the presence of warm air. Cool air moves down to the ground and presses the warm air up above it as it moves below, forcing the warmer air to rise above the cooler air. So this idea of convection, warmed rising air, cooling sinking air, is what causes vertical wind, the vertical motion of the air in the atmosphere going up and down. But also this convection is caused by the cool air coming down and then moving sideways, moving horizontally along the ground as the warm air is rising up from the ground and out into the atmosphere, where the heat dissipates and all that air becomes cool again and then sinks back down to the earth, and this whole process goes over and over again. So this process is called convection. In this whole process, you have solar radiation, which then is absorbed into the surface of the earth. As it's absorbed, the thermal radiation from the sun is stored in the earth. It also then begins to be released into the air above the ground, where bubbles of air warm and eventually rise into the atmosphere. Cool air sinks and will come underneath the warm air, moving horizontally, and so this is how we have wind formed. So let's take a look at paragraphs 9 and 10.